Welcome to lecture number 2 from our Foundations unit. I believe that life presents all of us with 3 big questions, the biggest questions that we can ever face. Those questions are, who or what am I? Why am I here? And how should I then live? And of course, these are logically sequenced. There's no point in trying to answer why you're here if you haven't first examined who and what you are. And there's no point in examining how you should live unless you've examined who and what you are and why you exist. So, let's start with those, and we're going to move from there and talk a little bit about the Imago concept, imaging. So, who and what am I involves this idea. How do you see yourself in terms of your humanity? What do you believe about your nature, your essence? How do you think about yourself regarding your body, your soul, your spirit? Second, why am I here? Well, what do you think about the origin of humanity in general and yourself in particular? How do you account for your existence and the existence of humanity? Why do you believe that this is true? And what does your position imply concerning how you view others and the world? And how do you explain the common shared humanity that you have with everyone else, but also the remarkable uniqueness of you as an individual, along with the remarkable uniqueness of every other individual who has ever lived? Then, question 3, how should I then live? Based on your responses to the first 2 questions, how do you think a person should live in relationships? A relationship to God, for example, if God exists, or to other beings, whether they be entities like supernatural beings, angels, demons, and so forth, or extraterrestrials. Or how about to other earthly creatures and other human beings, both humans and animals? What about to the environment as a whole? What should be our relationship, our privileges and responsibilities? And why do you believe that your response to this question is a valid one and the best one? These are very important questions that we all are faced with, and no matter what we say about it, we all think about those things, and we try to come up with answers that make sense to us. This is where the idea of imago, or imaging, becomes so important. There are really only 3 ways that human beings can look at themselves in terms of their image. The first is imago naturalis, the second, imago impersonale, and the third, imago Dei. Imago naturalis is the first perspective that approaches human identity as a direct result and sum total of empirical, naturalistic forces and processes. This is the view of Darwinian evolution and anti-supernatural secular philosophy. Nature is all there is, so of course, man is no more than a product of nature and natural forces. Consequently, human identity is limited to the physical properties and processes and what may arguably arise from them. At the core level, human beings are a composite of physical matter, tissue, blood, bones. Intangible qualities such as consciousness, conscience, will, thought, and feeling must be understood as illusory, or as realities arising from physical properties and processes. For example, mind properties are merely the effects produced by electrochemical brain activity. Well, the ultimate problem facing this view concerns how the intangible human qualities occur, but also showing why such characteristics cannot be the result of metaphysical supernatural power, whether it be an impersonal force or a personal being such as God. 2 further questions arise from this position. A, what does this approach suggest concerning intrinsic value, individual choices, and meaning? B, how does this perspective provide for man's elegance and dignity in terms of his creativity, his relationships, and his sense of value resulting from his accomplishments? These are important questions, and if you choose the imago naturalis position, you will be limited to what that position allows you to conclude. Imago impersonalis, the second approach. This second approach emphasizes the idea that humanity and human identity arises from one of two perspectives. A, human beings are the result of impersonal metaphysical forces, like the Force in George Lucas's Star Wars movies. This perspective is faced with providing logical, reasonable, and evidentiary reasons for accepting that personhood and personality may arise from impersonal force, even a metaphysical one. Because you see, impersonal by definition means not personal. So where does personal come from then? B, under Imago Impersonales, is the idea that human beings are manifestations of an impersonal, external, metaphysical reality, which is itself the only reality. Everything that exists is really this reality only. Therefore, no independent, individual reality is possible. Everything which seems to be real in and of itself is an illusion. The only reality is an all-inclusive, impersonal one, which cannot be personally known or understood. The problem facing this view is the difficulty explaining what seems so obviously to be real concerning individual personhood and personality. How does this occur in the first place if ultimate reality is impersonal? Why do personal relationships matter so much? What is human value? Why do choices seem so important? Why is there a quest for meaning which no human being can ever truly avoid or negate? Both views face the same dilemma as described in Imago Naturalis. A, what does this approach suggest concerning intrinsic value, individual choices, and meaning? And B, how does this perspective provide for man's elegance and dignity in terms of his creativity, his relationships, his sense of value resulting from his accomplishments? Well, these also are important questions that are not easily avoided. The third view possible is Imago Dei. This third view favors the idea that a superlative being of all beings, who is eternal and transcendent, actually exists. This being, because he is the superlative being, and none can be higher, is the being we refer to as God. As a being, God has personhood, personality, and is therefore personal. Therefore, God may be understood and known by other beings who possess these same attributes. This perspective suggests that human beings are created imago Dei, Latin for the image of God. This means that human beings intrinsically possess the highest identity possible. One cannot have an image greater than the image of the greatest possible being of all beings. Any other image is a downgrade, a degradation. This view avoids the problems of the other two perspectives because it intrinsically includes the idea of personhood and personality, which necessarily involve consciousness, thought, volition, will, individuality, value, meaning, and purpose, all of which are attributes of God, the superlative being. Therefore, if humans are created imago Dei, then humans possess, albeit to a lesser degree than God, all of the attributes of the Creator. This primary issue concerning this view involves two things. A, is there a legitimate basis for accepting that God, the superlative being, in fact exists? B, is there a way to determine who, among the many proposed options, God really is? And C, is it possible to personally know God, and if so, how? At this point, let's shift our focus to our toolbox once again and start by talking about the principles of logic, principles based upon common sense that are by nature self-validating. There are 7 of these I want to share with you, and I'll detail each one in turn. These are not in any particular order of ascendancy or descendancy. They're all just important. They're like the laws of physics. Those laws are fixed and non-negotiable. They don't change. The way they operate seems to change depending on context, but the laws themselves do not. Gravity is still gravity wherever you are. So, the first law of logic, or principle of logic, is the law of identity. This law says that everything that exists has a specific nature. And this is good, otherwise we couldn't recognize what anything is. Each entity that exists as something in particular, and it has characteristics that are a part of what it is. For example, a leaf is red, solid, dry, rough, flammable. It has the qualities of a leaf that are shared by all leaves, but it also has the particular qualities of this particular leaf in that it is solid, dry, rough, and flammable. Much like us, we share the attributes of humanity, but we also have unique attributes that belong to us alone. Another example, this book is white, has 312 pages. In these cases, we're referring to an entity with a specific identity. The particular type of identity or the trait discussed is not important. Their identities include all of their features, not just those mentioned. Now, this is important because if that were not so, when you look in the mirror in the morning, you would not be able to recognize who you see. It is those traits and characteristics that are shared by you with all of humanity that let you know you're human, but also the unique traits that you alone possess that let you know you are Bob, Sally, Bill, or Jennifer. This is good. Principle number 2, the law of non-contradiction. This law is one of the most obvious laws of logic, but it's also one of the most frequently denied. It states that for any two propositions, if they contradict each other, they cannot both be true. Whenever I argue with people about the law of non-contradiction, they almost always resort to equivocation to get around it, or switching the terms and the meanings of words. But two statements can only contradict each other if they are talking about the same thing at the same time and in the same sense. The following two statements provide an excellent example of this logical principle. Statement 1, it is raining outside. Statement 2, it's not raining outside. Now those contradict one another if we're talking about the same thing, the same time, in the same sense. A person who wants to argue against the law of non-contradiction may point out that both of these statements can be true, provided that one is referring to Phoenix, Arizona, and the other is referring to Tallahassee. Well, it may be raining in Tallahassee, but not in Phoenix. But if we're talking about different places, then the statements don't contradict each other, and consequently, they can both be true. If, however, they are both talking about the same thing at the same time in the same sense, they cannot both be true at the same time. Equivocation only gets you out of an actual contradiction. It doesn't get you past the law of non-contradiction. Principle 3, the law of the excluded middle, or mutual exclusivity of claims. The law of the excluded middle is a close cousin to the law of non-contradiction. While the law of non-contradiction tells us that a proposition and its negation cannot both be true, the law of the excluded middle tells us that either a proposition or its negation is true. For example, either my sister is pregnant or my sister is not pregnant. One of those is true and the other is false. The negation of the law of the excluded middle is that a statement and its proposition are both true. In that case, my sister is both pregnant and not pregnant, which is ridiculous. The problem with those who reject logic is that their arguments against logic are necessarily self-refuting. So before I show how that is so, I'll explain what self-refutation is all about. A self-refuting statement is a statement that fails to meet its own standard for being true. All meaningful statements are about something. For example, the statement, Steve teaches philosophy, is about Steve. Some statements include themselves in their field of reference. For example, the statement, all statements represent propositions, is about all statements, including the statement itself. A statement that is self-referential and that denies what it asserts is self-refuting. Here are some examples. 1, I cannot speak a word of English is self-refuting when I say that in English. 2, all statements over 5 words long are false. This is self-refuting because the very statement I've made is over 5 words long. And 3, everything is relative. There are no absolutes. This is self-refuting because when saying everything is relative, one has attempted to create an absolute. Principle 4, the law of verification. A claim or proposition concerning truth and reality must be willing to face the same criteria that it demands from the claim it opposes in order for it to be accepted and credible, reasonable, and valid. For example, a claim stating that Snickers bars are better than Butterfingers can only be accepted as true if the criteria used to critique the value of Butterfingers are also applied to the critique of Snickers in the same fashion as they're applied to Butterfingers. Principle 5, the law of cause and effect. The law of cause and effect states that every material effect must have an adequate antecedent or simultaneous cause. The mass of a paperclip is not going to provide the sufficient gravitational pull to cause a tidal wave. There must be an adequate cause for the tidal wave, like a massive offshore underwater earthquake. Leaning against a mountain will certainly not cause it to topple over. Jumping up and down on the ground will not cause an earthquake. If a chair is not placed in an empty room, the room will remain chairless. If matter was not made and placed in the universe, we would not exist. There must be an adequate antecedent or simultaneous cause for every material effect. Kalam's theory makes this clear. Kalam's theory says, basically, things that have a beginning have to be caused by something. The argument further states that the universe began. It came into existence. And the third point is, since the universe came into existence and had a beginning, something must have caused that beginning. That's how the law of cause and effect works. Principle 6, the law of cogito. Descartes said, cogito ergo sum, and his statement is comprised of 2 self-evident propositions. I think, in the sense that I am conscious, and I am, in the sense that I actually exist. The contradictory claims of each of these propositions is self-contradictory. That is, involves a stolen concept and gives rise to a paradox. Thus, I am not conscious could not be thought or said, or for that matter, heard or understood without being conscious. Similarly, I am not could not be expressed or observed without existing first. Thus, Descartes was quite right in regarding these propositions as axioms, that is, first principles, which do not depend upon prior principles. This argument or statement or assertion by Descartes is logically airtight. It cannot be refuted. The final law of logic involves probabilistic principles. These principles are relationally fixed and certain. Following paragraphs provide a brief historical perspective concerning how these principles and immutability developed in Western civilization. What caused the scientific revolution? How did science advance from relatively static medieval philosophies of nature to the dynamic technologies of modern science? Historians have argued that the church opposed the progress at every turn, but in fact, a set of new theological ideas ushered in the scientific innovations of men like Galileo, Descartes, and Newton. Christian thinkers applied God's sovereignty to the natural realm in a new way, asserting that nature was governed by God-designed mathematical laws. Then, concerned to protect that sovereignty against Aristotle's notion that natural entities possessed intrinsic drives, Christians began to strip away nature of her divinity, positing instead mechanical processes. Newton's genius lay in his discovery of previously hidden laws of nature. This disguises what was both a novel feature of the science of the 17th century and its enduring legacy, the idea that there existed, quote, laws of nature to be discovered in the first place. Well, what are these laws? For the Middle Ages, natural laws had been universal moral rules established by God. The injunction against murder, recognized by all cultures, was a typical example of natural law. The concept of physical law was completely absent. That came only as Christian thinkers extended God's legislative power to the natural world. Newton had thus enjoyed a considerable degree of autonomy because his studies expressed the idea that René Descartes stated, God alone is the author of all the motions in the world. Therefore, Newton said, since God had created fixed laws, nature could be understood. So the first principle of probability is the immutability of math throughout the universe. Simply stated, 3 is always 3, but can never be 2 or 4. And 2 plus 2 equals 4, never 5 or 3. Principle 2 is the immutability of physical law throughout the universe. Simply stated, regardless of the conditions and the context, gravity is always gravity and conforms to gravitational laws or principles. Now, I would like to conclude today's lecture by covering the 4 kinds of claims that are possible for human beings to make. There are only 4, and I've invited for about 50 years now anyone and everyone I talk about this with to come up with an additional type of claim, category, that's not included in these 4, and I have not yet found anyone who could do so. But this is not surprising since these 4 kinds of claims go back to antiquity, and no one throughout human history has thought of any more as well. So I'm pretty sure these are the 4 types of claims. The first claim that can be made, and again, these are not in any specific order. It's not an order of good to, or best to worst, or worst to best, or anything like that. They're just 4 different kinds of claims that need to be understood concerning what they claim and how they operate and how to analyze them. The first kind of claim is an empirical claim. Empirical claims propose truths concerning physical reality. For example, there are 30 chairs in this room. Or, example 2, the universe will continue to expand forever. Well, how would you verify that first claim? There are 30 chairs in the room. You would look around the room, you would count the chairs. Or you could go around and touch the chairs and count them. So, that's how you would verify, and you would have a high degree of certainty whether or not that claim was true based upon the physical evidence. The claims are proven or disproven by gathering and interpreting physical data. Absolute certainty is possible if the necessary data is accessible. Now, the claim that the universe will continue to expand forever sometimes fools people because of the word forever. They think that that makes it something other than empirical, because how could you ever check and know? How could you observe forever? Well, that's not the point. The point is this. We know based upon the red shift that was demonstrated by the Hubble telescope that Einstein was astounded by, and which he said verified his mathematical theories, which were based upon actual observations, that the universe in fact had a beginning because the universe is rapidly expanding. So if you do the reverse mathematics, there was a time when the universe was one single speck of matter and energy, and before that, the universe was not, and something caused it to be. We have the technology, like the Hubble telescope, to verify that the universe is expanding because of the red shift. As we observe the universe's expansion, if that shift ever changes and becomes a blue shift, we'll know the universe is in fact not expanding and in fact not statically stopped, but is in fact contracting. So this is an empirical claim because the basis for determining its validity is empirical. The second kind of claim is analytical. Analytical claims propose truths concerning words and their meanings. For example, a dog is a mammal, or coffee is a beverage. How would we ever determine whether that was true? Well, you can't determine that a dog is a mammal simply by looking at dogs. You first have to know what a mammal is. And if you can define the qualities and characteristics that make something a mammal, then you can look at an individual dog or many dogs and see if that category or class fits those criteria, those qualities and characteristics. If in fact a dog fits those mammal qualities, then you can say, yes, it's true that a dog is a mammal. But again, it's not about looking at dogs or even looking at mammals. You first have to know what a mammal is and define mammal and to see if the dog fits that definition. The claims are proven or disproven by examining word meanings and the reasonableness of their uses and applications. Absolute certainty is possible once the meanings of the words are established and accepted. The third kind of claim is a value claim. Value claims propose truths concerning what one should be or what one ought to do. For example, everyone who is registered to vote should vote in the upcoming election. Or example 2, only chauvinists oppose a woman's right to choose to have an abortion. Well, these claims are proven or disproven through comparative analyses of the benefits and liabilities concerning the support of the claim. This involves examining both quantity and quality supports for the claim. Absolute certainty is not possible. However, support or non-support for such a claim is conclusive if that which is most reasonable can be discerned. Everyone who is registered to vote should vote in the upcoming election. The best way to determine that is to set up sort of a chart in our minds, or even write it down on paper, and list the benefits of everyone voting as opposed to the liabilities. Also including circumstances that might be extenuating in a particular context. If you do all of that, you have a basis for looking at the issue and deciding, is it really true that everyone should vote in this particular upcoming election? But you also have to consider quantity and quality, because you might have 3 items that are pros and 8 items that are cons. But if the pros have a quality that is so high that it overrides the 8 cons, then the qualitative analysis is superior, and that makes that position better. Always quality overrides quantity. It's not the number of things on your side, it's the quality of those things. So for example, if you had a list of reasons for why it's a good idea to drink and drive as pros, and you had 6 or 7, but on the negative side you had only 2, 1, you might get killed, and 2, you might get arrested. Those 2 qualitative items would serve to override everything on the other side of the argument. Only chauvinists oppose a woman's right to choose to have an abortion is a little bit tricky, because you use the same kind of analysis, pros, cons, qualitative, quantitative, but there's a ringer word put into this claim. It's mixed language, which means that it's either positively or negatively charged to unfairly sway the argument. That mixed term is chauvinist. If you know the word chauvinist, you know it comes from a Frenchman who had a misogynistic disregard for women. So anyone who becomes associated with Chauvin is called a chauvinist. And this is viewed as a person who dislikes or is unfair in their view and treatment of women. Well, this argument, only chauvinists oppose a woman's right to choose to have an abortion, eliminates any possibility of someone giving logical and valid reasons for why an abortion might not be a good idea for every woman in every case, because immediately anyone who says that is already a misogynist and a chauvinist. That's an unfair argument. If you were faced with that, you would have to point out the use of that term and reject that position solely on that basis, and hope the person making that statement would be willing to engage with you without that charged term as part of the argument. The fourth kind of claim is a metaphysical claim. Metaphysical claims propose truths concerning non-physical, transcendent reality. For example, it is a matter of pure luck that I passed the exam. or example 2, God exists. These claims are by nature abstract. Therefore, attempting to verify their validity through empirical or physical means is doomed to failure. Physical evidence can point one direction or another, but it can't verify. And that's the problem. So people who want to debate God's existence solely on physical proofs are doomed to failure because they can only point a direction, not provide a conclusion. I will say, however, that physical evidence does in fact point one direction as being superior over others. But we'll get to that sometime later. Empirical evidence may provide conclusive circumstantial support or refutation concerning a metaphysical claim. Verifying such a claim involves abstract reasoning based on the application of the principles of logic, along with circumstantial, non-abstract evidence and effective and valid reasoning processes. The goal is to determine what is most reasonable and therefore most likely to be true. Absolute certainty is not currently attainable for beings who are finite and limited. However, that which is most reasonable and most likely is attainable and should be sought for and then accepted. Well, this concludes our lecture for today. And again, I hope that you find this meaningful, interesting, maybe entertaining in some ways. I hope so. And I look forward to talking with you again in the next upcoming lecture. Thank you.